Well, good morning, everybody. You guys can go ahead and grab your seats. I like it. I like how much everybody is talking to one another, getting to know one another, meeting new people. My name is Matt Olszewski. I am one of the pastors here at H2O Toledo. If I have not had a chance to meet you, I look forward to maybe after the service, when we have the meal, to possibly meet you. Our other pastor is Pastor Tom Stewart. He's here hitting this weird drum here this week, but he'll be speaking next week, so you'll get to hear more from him. But I'm so glad that you guys are here, and I want to start out with a question. A lot of times I start out my messages with some sort of question or some sort of statement, so I guess I'm not asking you a question, but I don't know if you guys would agree with this or not, if you would agree with what I'm about to say, but I think as human people, we tend to be pretty good at making assumptions about things in our world and people that we meet, right? Like the information that we have at a certain point in time about something that we're experiencing or people that we're meeting, we tend to start making assumptions about what we think about those things or people. So let me give you a few examples. If I meet you and you tell me that you grew up in the country, some like rural part of Ohio, I just assume that you like fishing, I assume that you like hunting, and I assume that you like country music, okay? I do none of those, and I will gladly talk to you about those things, but I just assume you do all those things, okay? If you're an engineering student, which you always meet engineering students on this campus, I assume that your greatest joy and passion in life is not talking to people. But if you have to do it, you'll do it, okay? If you are a nursing major, which again, there's a lot of potential nurses here in this room this morning. If you're a nursing major, I assume that you do enjoy talking to people. I assume that you like jumping in and getting your hands dirty and serving people. I assume that depending on what kind of nurse you want to be, if you want to be an emergency room nurse, I assume that you have some sort of addiction to like just high stakes situations, and you're always looking for the next adventure that you're going to go on, or just adrenaline rush, something that you can be involved in. That's what nurses are. Now, there's people that make assumptions about me because I'm standing up in front of you and I work for a church and they've given me this title, pastor, right? So when I meet people and they ask me what I do, and I say pastor, they assume that I've grown up in church my entire life, which I did not, and maybe someday we'll get into more of that story. It's not a bad assumption, but I just did not grow up going to church, and so if you grew up going to church and you sang all those, in my opinion, weird, like kid church songs, I've never sang one of those in my entire life, and so when you guys start singing some sort of song in front of me that you learned in church as a 5-year-old, I'm just like, I don't know what's happening right now. And I kind of wish you would stop singing whatever song you're singing, right? And so people make assumptions about me as a pastor. Or because I work for a church, many times, not all times, but many times people make assumptions about that I have very specific political beliefs or cultural beliefs or spiritual beliefs. People tend to think that because I work for a church, that most people that work for a church or that would identify themselves as a Christian, they say, you probably believe these things, right? These are the things that you adhere to, that you would say are true in this world. And sometimes they're right, and sometimes I would say that they are way, way off. And so we have these assumptions. And when I hear students talk and I start getting on campus and I start talking to students about their assumptions about church, I start hearing stories about students that say they don't really want anything to do with the church anymore if they grew up in the church. I hear students tell me they just don't understand why church is even important. Maybe that's experiences. Maybe that's just things that they've heard. Maybe that's assumptions that they have. Or maybe they just kind of look around and they see people that go to church and they're like, they're not that much different than me, so I don't really see why church is important. Which makes me really compassionate towards those students. It makes me really compassionate to understand why, to understand how that's the image that they've been given about what church is all about. And it makes me curious, and I start asking questions, and I start wondering, well, if they don't see why church is important, if they don't see the vision for why this thing that God has established, this thing that we're gathered here today is important, if they don't understand why it's important, I start to wonder, do we even understand why it's important? Do we understand what the church is and its importance in the world today? Do we understand what the Bible is and its importance in our lives? And then I've heard students say this before, like, I just don't understand the point of church. I don't understand the point of the Bible. Why do you hold the Bible to be so important to you? So it just gets me wondering, do we understand all these things? And so that's why we're going to be going through a series in these next few weeks, really exploring these exact topics. What is the church and why is it important? What's the Bible? Why is it important? And then when you put those together, what is the point of it all? So we're going to be going through, this is week 1. Tom's going to talk about the Bible next week, and then I'll close it up with just what's the point? Why do we put so much emphasis on the church? Why do we put so much emphasis on the Bible? And so we're going to talk about the church this morning, why it is important, why we should even care. And I want to offer this beautiful vision of the church that the Bible gives us, that the authors and the writers, that they write and give us this vision of the church. Because what really makes me sad is when I talk to students that have a certain experience with the church, or students that would say, I don't really want to go to church because I don't see why it's relevant. It makes me sad because it makes me see that they don't see the vision of what is described to us in the Bible, of how beautiful the church can be when we are functioning and healthy. It's amazing. And so I want us to take a look at that this morning. And so I want to start at the most foundational part. I want us to start right at the beginning, that if we were to start somewhere else, if we were to get this wrong, that we would be starting in the wrong place and everything else would fall apart. It's kind of like if you played baseball or softball growing up, which I'd say if you grew up in America, most American kids usually try, at least for one season, baseball or softball and soccer, okay? But if you played baseball, what's the number one thing that coaches tell you to do when they're trying to teach you to hit a ball? Keep your eye on the ball, right? That's the most important rule of baseball, that if you want to be successful at hitting a ball, you have to keep your eye on it, because if you keep playing baseball and you don't put that truth into practice, you're going to get older and people are going to start throwing it harder and faster. They're going to start making it curve and dip and do all these different things. And if you don't learn the most foundational element of hitting a ball, keeping your eye on it, as you get older, it's not going to work out very well. And this is where Jesus, I think he wants us to start at the most foundational, keep your eye on the ball foundation. And so we're going to take a look at a section of the Bible where Jesus kind of starts right at the beginning. And so Jesus, he's hanging with his disciples. He's hanging with his closest friends. And the word disciple means learner. Okay, so Jesus and his disciples were constantly learning things from Jesus. because disciple means learner. And so in this moment, Jesus is asking his disciples a question. It's not going to be on the screen quite yet, but he asks this question of who do people say the Son of Man is? Who do people say the Son of Man is? And the term Son of Man would have been very familiar to his disciples. It was a title that Jesus often gave to himself. And they came back with answers like, oh, some say that you're John the Baptist, some say that you're Elijah, some would say that you're Jeremiah or one of the other prophets. Many of those people lived long, long before Jesus, except John the Baptist. And so they were kind of saying, this is the word on the street. This is what people are saying about you, Jesus. This is who you are. But then Jesus asks his disciples the most important question that I think any one of us in this room this morning could answer ourselves. He says, but what about you? He asked. Who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? And one of Jesus' disciples called Simon, he's known for speaking very quickly. He's known for acting very quickly. He doesn't think before he speaks or acts oftentimes, and it gets himself in a lot of trouble. But in this moment, Simon gives a great answer. It's one where he gets it right. Okay, Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Now, we talked about this briefly last week, but Messiah means the one who saves or the one who rescues. And I don't think we think about this very often, or we don't think about it in this terms of we need to be saved or rescued. I think we go about our lives every day, and we understand that life is chaotic. We understand that good things happen on some days. There's days where really bad things happen. There's days where we just feel dejected. We feel alone. We feel just down and out. We understand that in life, it's not always sunshine, lollipops, roses. There's just a lot of hurt and pain in this world. And so Simon Peter is saying, you are the one who can save. You are the one who can rescue. And this is exactly why Jesus came to this earth. He came so that we could be rescued from sin. We could be rescued from all the things that were not how God originally designed this world, for us to love him and for us to love others. And so Jesus came so that he could take on the punishment of that sin, so that we wouldn't have to go through that punishment, so that we wouldn't have to feel dejected or alone or have a lack of hope. He came so that he could die not only for our sin, but for the sin that others commit against us. Again, so that we could have hope, so that he could offer us joy in times of despair, that he could offer us sacrificial love when all we see around us is greed. When we just walk around this world, when we walk around this campus, and we think, is everybody just out for themselves here? Is there anybody that's going to sacrificially love? Well, that's Jesus. Jesus constantly showing his love. And then the other statement that Simon Peter exclaimed, he said, the Son of the living God. This is just Simon Peter's way of saying, Jesus, you are king. You are king over everything. He's saying, if there's anyone that can save me, if there's anyone that could rescue me from the troubles of this world, if there's anyone that I would want to take orders from, that has the power and authority to say, do this or do that, it's you, Jesus. That's what Simon Peter is saying. So then Jesus responds to him, and he says, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but my Father in heaven. That's basically Jesus saying, that is not human wisdom answer. This is an eternal truth that God has revealed to you. And then he continues, and he says, I tell you that you are Peter, which was a nickname that Jesus gave Simon. I think it's funny to think that like Jesus was just handing out nicknames to his disciples. This nickname means rock or stone, right? Not like a super cool nickname that we would want, but Jesus gives Simon this nickname, Peter, Petros, or rock or stone. And then he says, and on this rock I will build my church. I will build my church, my ecclesia. And I try not to throw out like fancy words to you guys, but that's the Greek word for what we now call church. But ecclesia was just a term for a gathering of the people. There was a purpose for why a group of people would meet, because originally it was not a Christian term. It was just a general term used within their culture. And so Jesus is he's saying, I am going to build my ecclesia, my gathering of the people. They're going to gather for a certain purpose, and I'm going to build my church on this rock. On this rock. So what is this rock? What is he referring to? This is kind of a strange part or strange thing that Jesus is saying. But Jesus is talking, and he's giving this nickname to Peter called the rock. And I think sometimes we get that confused with saying that Peter is going to be this rock the church is going to be built on. I think we get confused saying that Jesus is going to transfer his power and his authority to one person, and that's who he's going to build the church on. But if the ecclesia, if the church is a gathering of the people, it's many, many people. And so Jesus is passing on his church to all of us, the people that are following him, that know him. But he's using Peter as an example, and he's saying, the rock is that statement that you just said. Let's revisit what Peter said. He said, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. This is the rock. This statement of faith, this rock, this you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God, this is what the church is going to be built on, because the foundation, the keep your eye on the ball foundational truth is Jesus is King. And every church needs to start there, that Jesus is King. That whatever we know Jesus did, whatever we know Jesus said, it is our job to imitate him as closely as we can. And so we gather here on Sunday mornings, and we get reminded that Jesus is King. That's why we come here. This is kind of like church headquarters, right? We go throughout the week and we live our lives, but then we come back to headquarters to be reminded, to be encouraged of the love that Jesus has for us, to be reminded of who we are in Jesus, to remind ourselves that we don't have to live in doubt of where we stand with God. We don't have to live in doubt of who we are, but we're reminded that Jesus is King. But the church is not stationary. This is not just the church. Today is not just the church. The church is on the move. It's an everyday gathering that moves together as a united team throughout the cities or the campus they live, imitating the life of Jesus, our King. So the church is not stationary, it's not stale, it's not just sitting and listening. The church is alive. And we're going to take a look at what one of the early church leaders, a guy named Paul, he talks about it in this way, where the church is alive. And so he says this in 1 Corinthians. He says, just as a body, though one, has many parts, but all its many parts form one body, so it is with Christ. So he's saying we should be like a human body, one collective unit, and that in order for it to function properly and be healthy, it has to take on many parts. And in order for it to be healthy, it needs to move, right? Bodies were created to move. Bodies were not created to just sit still. They were created to move and have action. And then he continues. He says, now if the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? All right, I really hate to use this as an example because I have incredible Marvel fatigue. They come out with a movie every 3 months, and it's the same thing over and over again. But imagine if Marvel superheroes, they all had different names, they all had different costumes, but that's where their differences ended, right? Imagine they all had the same powers, the same personalities. They were all just kind of the same. They just had different names and different costumes. There would be no Hulk smash because everyone would have the powers of Doctor Strange, which, if we can just admit this right now, Doctor Strange is the most boring Marvel character. I know, I'm saying things that are going to make people upset, okay? I just find him to be so boring. He isn't funny, and all he does is messes with time. That's all he does. We'll talk later, okay? There would be no Iron Man humor, right? Iron Man is funny. There would be no Thor thunder, whatever that means, I don't know. There would be no Black Panther technology and love for justice. There would be none of that. There would just be clock and watch winding, just doing this over and over again, because everybody would be Doctor Strange. God created us all with different, unique purposes. He made us a part of the body, and we all have different gifts that declare our faith, that express that Jesus is King. We all have them, and we all need them. I need you because you are different than me. I need you because you can serve and love me in different ways that I can't serve and love you. I need you because you can love and serve people on this campus in ways that I can't do it. I get to be the guy up here that speaks to you, at you. Not everybody gets to do this. And that's okay. You guys have important jobs. You have important parts that you play in God's body. And I want you to check this out, because God did this with such precision. Because Paul continues. He says, but in fact, God has placed the parts in the body, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be. If they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. God has perfectly placed you. Paul says it's just as he wanted them to be. Whatever role you think you might play, wherever you think you fit into the body of Christ, it's exactly where God wants you to be. If you've ever felt like you don't fit somewhere, Paul is telling us, you have a place. You have a place here. And then we end with this last verse, which, if you're new to H2O, what we try to do is we have a memory verse every month. Something that we really want our church to value and take hold of and memorize a verse from the Bible every month. And Tom's going to talk more about this next week on why the importance of the Bible, but we really believe that the Bible is God's words to us. And there's all sorts of things in this world that we memorize. We memorize a lot of great songs. But one of the greatest things that we could memorize is truth, straight from God's mouth. That we would understand who he is and who we are, and what he says is all of you together are Christ's body, and each of you is a part of it. And so over the next month, through the month of September, we're gonna memorize together 1 Corinthians 12:27. And so we're going to talk a lot about that and bring that up over and over again. So if the first criteria we talked about for being a church is Jesus is king, the second is we need each other. That when we gather as the church here at the headquarters and move together around our campus and our city, we need each other in order to faithfully show and express to the rest of the world who God is and how we do that together. The way that we need each other and the way that we love one another, Jesus himself said this, it's not going to be up on the screen, but Jesus said, "They will know that you are my disciples. They will know that you are my followers by the way that you love one another." So when we care for each other and when we see each other and when we're able to confidently go out into the world and express who he is in our classes, at work, in our dorm room, to our families, playing basketball at the rec center, eating in the dining hall. These are all the places that we can go and be the church and express Jesus' love to the rest of the world. So before we move on to the last section, I want to address one thing that I know that I've talked to students a lot over the past few years. And you guys have heard this too, but there's people that would say that I want to be a Christian, or I am a Christian. I just don't want to be a part of the church. I want to be a Christian. I just don't want to be a part of the church. Or I've become too busy. I don't have time to be a part of the church. I don't have time to come on Sunday. I don't have time to hang out with my friends that would say that they go to church. And I want to talk about how it's not the healthiest state that we could be in. I want you to think about it this way. Lions. A gathering of lions, that's called a pride, right? We know that. We've heard that. A gathering of lions is called a pride. A group of ants, that's called a colony or an army. Zebras. A group of zebras, it's called a zeal, right? They stay together. They're animals that stay together in packs. Now, it would be strange for a lion to say, I like being a lion, I just don't like the pride. So I think I'm going to do things on my own. Or an ant saying, I like being an ant. There's great things about being an ant. I just don't want to be a part of the colony or the army. You know what happens to these animals if they don't stay with their group? They suffer. They don't survive. Even a lion is the king of the jungle. And if he is alone in the jungle, eventually the jungle will overwhelm him when he's away from his pride. So guys, I don't think it makes much sense that if we were to say we are Christians, followers of Jesus, we are not going to survive just living life on our own. So this is my warning to you, is do not isolate yourself. Do not allow yourself to be taken away from the pack, the people that want to encourage you and to help you grow and strengthen in your faith. Don't let loneliness be your plan. Even if it's not your plan, don't just drift into loneliness. Let your plan be staying close to the people that can help you. We need each other. And if we are missing from the body, we all hurt. If we're missing from the body, we all hurt. Okay, so we have Paul, so when we put all these different elements of church together, Jesus is king, we need each other. This is what happens. This is the result, and this is what I call the impossible dream come true. And I call it impossible not because it is impossible. I call it impossible because most people think that the portion of the Bible that I'm about to read and the way they used to live in the early church, most people think that's impossible. That's not real. That's not reality. We can't live that way anymore. Let me read this to you. It says they, the earliest Christians, They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. So the apostles were the early church leaders, and they reminded the ecclesia, the church, over and over again that Jesus is king. So they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, meaning they hung out together, and to the breaking of bread. They ate together, which we're about to do, and they devoted themselves to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. This is like their Jesus is king section. They're just declaring and meeting together over and over again, declaring that Jesus is king. Then it continues. And all the believers met together in one place and shared everything they had. They sold their property and possessions and shared the money with those in need. They worshiped together at the temple each day, met in homes for the Lord's Supper, and shared their meals with great joy and generosity, all the while praising God and enjoying the goodwill of all the people. This was the we need each other time of this. So I want to be clear about this, because that last section, that can shake people up a little bit. All right, they shared what? They shared everything together. So this is not a command that we must share everything together. It's not a call for everything to be equal and fair, right? We've lived enough life already to know that not everything is equal and fair. God is not calling us to say everything needs to be equal and fair. But what this is that this is a call to share with joy and not fear, right? There's things in our lives that we hold very close to ourselves, and we think, I don't want to share that. I don't want someone else to experience that. I think it's us finding the opportunities, the things that are in our life, the things that we can offer, that we can share with joy and not have fear. And then second, to share out of your plenty with generosity. To share out of your abundance with generosity. As college students, you may not think that you have a whole lot of abundance, but I promise you meet people every day that you have more than them in something. Doesn't have to be money, but you have more of something that you can offer somebody, and we can share that with generosity. Because look what happened when they recognized Jesus as king and they lived in such a way that showed that they needed each other. It says, and each day the Lord added to their fellowship those who were being saved. The way that they were living their lives was so attractive. It was so incredible and compelling that people could not resist being a part of their community, which resulted in people getting saved, which is exactly where we started our description of church. It was Jesus hearing from Peter that you are the Messiah. You are the one that can save and rescue. You can rescue us from the greed of this world, the injustices of this world, the powers of this world. They were rescued by knowing that Jesus is king in their life. So a church is where Jesus is king, that we need each other, and that people are rescued. So I want to end with a story that I shared probably a little over a year ago. We did a series, What's Your Story? And we had people write in anonymously, just their story of what God has done in their life. And I want to share a story from one of the girls that shared hers. A girl that graduated, so dear to our family. We love her so much, but she just has an incredible story that I want to read to you. She says, I grew up in a family that was well revered in the town and church. Everyone knew and loved us. My dad and stepmom were the type of people to do anything for anyone. What people didn't know was the abuse that went on behind closed doors. They didn't know my dad was an abusive alcoholic. They didn't know about the screaming, slamming, spitting, and choking that would happen when we got home. I believed my parents when they told me that I was worthless and unlovable. Throughout my childhood, I tried to kill myself 3 times. On New Year's Eve, my dad was drunk and decided he didn't want us anymore. He called me a worthless whore who would get pregnant before I was 16 and told my brothers they would be druggies and be on the streets with prostitutes. I was 12. He then took us to my mother's doorstep, dropped us off, and left us alone in the city to fend for ourselves until she came back from her night of partying. Over the next few days and weeks, I spent every day hiding from the police because we were absent from school and they were looking to take us back to our dad. I started preparing every meal and taking care of my brothers. One day, while my brothers were gone, I was kneeling in the basement on the gray concrete floor and decided to attempt to take my life for the third and final time. I remember feeling so at peace with it and angry with this God guy who didn't love me. I started talking to God very sternly for a 12-year-old and told him that this was his last chance. He was either going to show up right here and now, or I was done. He was either going to show up and be my father as he claims he is, or I'm leaving because I couldn't continue doing this on my own. I gave God an ultimatum, and he showed up. In that moment, I felt his peace and love, and on repeat, I kept hearing, "I am your father," until I was able to stand up, go upstairs, and make some pizza rolls for dinner. From that moment on, I decided my life was going to be for Christ, and I would do as he says. That was her Jesus is King moment. We went back to my dad's and continued on with life as if it never happened. I knew that God loved me for the first time, but was still seeking love in the wrong places. I wanted acceptance and to feel worth something, I fell in love with my best friend and high school sweetheart. I had no idea what a relationship was supposed to look like. Every relationship I have ever seen had ended in divorce. So whatever he said went. On New Year's Eve, when I was 17, I was sexually assaulted by him. I felt dirty, disgusting, and that no one in the world would want me anymore. So I kept it quiet and stayed with him because who else would want me after that? I didn't know my worth. I didn't know better existed, and I didn't know my identity and beauty was in what God said, not this boy. As far as I knew, this was the only person in the world who loved me. Then I came to UT and I found H2O. I found a place where everyone was broken, where everyone had a story and was open and honest about their story. I found a place where God's mercy and grace and love is truly for everyone, and everyone was truly seeking God. It was life-changing. For the first time in my life, I could find freedom and joy in community. So this was her we need each other moment and her rescued moment. She finishes by saying, I started going to therapy and processing through my trauma and building my arsenal so I was prepared to fight my toxic thoughts when bad things happened again in the future. This helped me tremendously and helped me lean on God in trying times. I don't know what else life has in store, but I know that God will use me and send me wherever he wants, and that as long as my eyes are fixed on him, I can choose joy in every circumstance. And when we talk about the beauty of the church, and H2O played a pretty tiny part in all of that. When we talk about the beauty of the church, and we start asking ourselves, is the church important? You know who would say the church is important? This girl right here. She'd say that the church is so vital. Church is a place where we can become new people, where we can experience love and grace like we've never known before, where we can start hearing other people's stories and, in a weird way, get comfort knowing that their stories are just as jacked up as ours, and knowing that we have a God that can change all of that. That is the church. Finally, I want to jump back to Matthew 16, where Peter made his declaration, and then Jesus responds. He says, and I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades, which is just another word for hell, and the gates of hell will not overcome it. When all hell breaks loose in this world, when we feel like things are so out of control, so we feel depressed with where we're at in life, when we think about those things, not even the gates and the powers of hell can overcome the beauty and the power of what Jesus does through his church. That's a beautiful thing. And I think we can be that kind of church here on this campus. I really do. I think as you guys walk around campus and as you guys start meeting new people on campus and you start building relationships with them, you have the opportunity to be that body that moves together. Whatever part you play in that body, you move together and you move as a unit and you start showing them the beauty that Jesus is King. And you start showing them that when you have friendships and you have people that are in your life that care for you and that love you, they start to see, wow, that's different. I've never experienced that. And then we're a church that we get to see people rescued. So I want to just end by praying for this, and then we'll finish up by singing. I want to pray for us as a church and people that could be a beautiful vision for this campus. God, we thank you that church is not just, it's not a game we play. It's not an activity. It's not a club. It's not just something that we decide to be a part of. God, it's a massive vision for what the world could be like here and now. God, you've made every single person in this room, if they say they're a follower of you, if they've put their faith in you, if they've said that Jesus is King, they play a massive part in showing the rest of the world your beauty. Even if they feel like their life is still in chaos, even if they feel like their life is not where they would want it to be, that's the whole point. You've always taken women and men who don't have their lives together, but they point to you and they have confidence in knowing that you are the only one that can rescue them, and that they just trust that. They trust it day by day, and they grow in their understanding of what that trust means. I pray that we could be that kind of church. God, help us declare that you are King. Help us know how desperately we need each other. God, help us see lives changed, people rescued. We love you, Jesus. Amen.